Imagine the heartache of losing your child in the most tragic way possible, and then the torment of seeing the accused walk into a courtroom seemingly without remorse. The anguish is overwhelming, the sense of injustice suffocating. Every parent's worst nightmare unfolded before Marianne Bachmeier when her 7-year-old daughter, Anna, was brutally taken from her. This is a story that explores the desperate quest for justice that drove Marianne to an extraordinary act in the courtroom, a moment that would forever etch her name into history. Hey dudes, welcome to the Weird and Wicked podcast, where we'll dive into the most bizarre and spine-chilling tales from around the world. I'm Rachel, your guide on this eerie adventure. I have an obsession with the mysterious and the unknown. Get ready to explore the most bizarre, unnerving, and unbelievable stories, from true crime and conspiracy theories to ghosts and cryptids. I'll be covering it all. In today's episode, we dive into the gripping and emotionally charged case of Marianne Bachmeier, a mother who took justice into her own hands in a moment of profound despair and fury. Stay tuned, because the truth is often stranger and more wicked than fiction. Warning, this episode contains graphic depictions of child murder which may not be suitable for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Born on June 3, 1950, Marianne Bachmeier grew up in Stardust, a small town in West Germany. I'm also going to add real quick, I might be pronouncing a lot of these words wrong this episode. Names, cities, we'll see how it goes. Her early life was marked by hardship and displacement. Marianne was an only child, and her family fled to Germany from East Prussia shortly after World War II, living in a refugee camp during her childhood. These early experiences undoubtedly shaped the difficult path that lay ahead for her. Also, ignore the cats because they're probably going to be going in and out of the room behind me. Ace likes to go in there and shut the door on himself, so he's like stuck in there, but it like doesn't latch all the way, so then they'll start like messing around with each other. So there might be a ghost with me this episode again. Bachmeier grew up in a conservative and strict home with devoutly religious parents. Her father, a former member of the Waffen-SS, epitomized the authoritarian figure. He was a heavy drinker who spent much of his time at a local bar, creating a tense and often hostile home environment. As his drinking escalated, so did his aggression, which he frequently directed at Marianne and her mother. This toxic atmosphere eventually led to her parents' divorce. Marianne's mother later remarried a man named Paul Wise, a professional wrestler and truck driver. Unfortunately, Paul was also very abusive, and this just continued the cycle of violence for Marianne. The constant turmoil at home pushed Marianne towards rebellion during her teenage years, like she stayed out late, skipped school, and openly defied her mother and stepfather's rules. At the age of 16, after being caught sneaking out to visit a boy, her mother kicked her out of the house. With nowhere else to go, Marianne moved in with her boyfriend at the time. In 1966, at the age of 16, Marianne became pregnant with her first child. Despite her stepfather's strictness, her mother showed some compassion by arranging for Marianne and her boyfriend to stay in a hotel room during her pregnancy. Marianne's mother visited daily, bringing them food and necessities and supporting her daughter through this challenging time. After giving birth, Marianne's mother managed to convince her stepfather to allow them back home, but the environment remained unwelcoming. With no proper place for the baby, who slept on the kitchen table, and increasing tension at home, Marianne was taken to a home for unwed mothers. During her stay here, her relationship with her boyfriend ended, and she decided to give up her child for adoption. After this, Marianne returned home but faced another pregnancy at the age of 18 by a new boyfriend. Their relationship quickly fell apart. So, after a fight, her boyfriend abandoned her on the side of the road, and while hitchhiking, Marianne was sexually assaulted by the person who picked her up. And this is just adding another layer of trauma just before the birth of her second child. She's still pregnant when this happened. Once again, with no stable home or support, she gave her second child up for adoption immediately after birth. Following the death of her stepfather from cancer, Marianne moved back in with her mother. She started a relationship with a man named Christian, but it quickly deteriorated. In an attempt to rekindle a past relationship, she reached out to her ex-boyfriend but was sexually assaulted by him. Distraught, she returned to Christian, but their relationship was also marked by constant conflict. In 1972, Marianne found some semblance of stability working at Christian's bar, Tapasa, a family-owned pub where Christian was the manager. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child, and Christian was the father this time. This period marked a brief semblance of stability in her otherwise tumultuous life. On November 14th, 1992, Marianne gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Anna. Unfortunately, Marianne's parenting skills left much to be desired. Working at the bar meant that she was awake all night and slept during the day. Eventually, Christian wanted Marianne to take full custody of Anna, leading to Marianne raising her daughter alone. As a result, Anna spent her nights at the bar with her mother, who worked late shifts, and her days largely unsupervised while her mother slept. Anna's childhood was far from typical. She often found herself sleeping on benches or tables at the bar, as her parents were preoccupied with work. Marianne treated Anna more like an adult than a child, expecting her to cook, clean, and take care of herself from a very young age. Anna frequently slept in the storage room while her mother worked, missing out on the carefree experiences of childhood. The mother-daughter relationship was strained, with constant fights erupting between them. Bar patrons often saw Anna eating scraps, as the bar primarily offered alcohol and appetizers. Her irregular sleep schedule led to poor performance in school, while Anna often falling asleep in class and her grades suffering as a result. By the age of 7, Anna's reluctance to attend school had become apparent, exacerbating her academic struggles. Despite the challenges, Anna was described by those who knew her as a vibrant and lively child. However, the lack of a stable and nurturing family life took its toll. Marianne's decision to keep Anna with her at the bar rather than allow a foster family to care for her highlighted the ongoing difficulties in providing a suitable environment for her daughter. And as we dive deeper into the story, we will see how these early experiences and the intense bond between her mother set the stage for the dramatic events that would follow. So we've got this mother and daughter. Poor Anna is just pretty much growing up in this bar while Marianne is trying to make money for the two of them and provide a sort of stable life for the two of them. Many would say, like, Marianne should have had a different job, obviously. You can't be raising a child in a bar overnight and just having her sleep in a storage room while you're, making drinks and serving appetizers and stuff to people who are drunk. But this was Anna's life, and this will come into play later on in the story. On May 5th, 1980, Anna had a fight with Marianne. Like many kids her age, she was upset and did not want to go to school, so she decided to skip. Her plan was simple: head over to her friend's house. But when she got there, she realized her friend was already at school. Not wanting to go back home, Anna started wandering around town. This wasn't really out of character for her. She was pretty used to keeping herself busy. That day, Marianne didn't wake up until later in the afternoon. She had spent part of the day at a photo shoot for her renovated Volkswagen, not realizing that her daughter had never gone to school. So when she returned home, she noticed that Anna wasn't back yet. And Marianne started to make some calls, first to friends and then to the bar where she worked, but really no one had seen Anna at all that day. So as evening crept in, Marianne began to worry a lot more. Something really wasn't right. Anna wasn't the kind of kid who would stay out late without telling her mom. And because of this, Marianne eventually called the police to file a missing persons report. On the morning of May 6th, 1980, so this is the day after Marianne can't find her daughter, A woman walked into the police station, visibly distressed. She was clutching a note in her hand and was about to change the course of the investigation into Anna Bachmeier's disappearance. What she revealed to the police would lead to a tragic and horrifying discovery. She told the officers that her fiancé, Klaus Gombrowski, a 35-year-old butcher, had confessed to murdering little Anna. It wasn't a stranger's crime. Anna knew Klaus. She had been to his home before, often stopping by to play with his cats. Klaus was someone that she trusted. So we know now that on May 5th, the day Anna went missing, she was wandering the streets after her argument with her mother, and she wasn't really ready to go back home to face the consequences for skipping school and whatnot. So she just started walking around, trying to pass time. And it was during this aimless wandering that she encountered Klaus. Klaus invited Anna into his home, likely under the guise of playing with his cats or just chatting. This was nothing unusual for Anna. She'd done it before, and Klaus had never given her a reason to feel unsafe. Little did she know, this time would be different. So as his fiancée is speaking to the police, she hands over the note that Klaus had left for her. And the note was very chilling. It was a message asking her to meet at a specific restaurant, but it was also a written confession. In the note, Klaus expressed his desire to see her one last time, to give her a hug, knowing full well what he had done. The police, now armed with this critical piece of evidence, wasted no time. They set up a covert operation at the restaurant mentioned in the note, and Klaus, oblivious to the fact that his fiancée had betrayed him, showed up at the designated time. But instead of the warm embrace he expected, he was met by law enforcement officers who were there to arrest him. As the details of the night began to unravel, the full horror of what Anna had endured came to light. Klaus had held Anna captive in his home for several hours. During that time, he sexually assaulted her. But the nightmare did not end there. Klaus ultimately strangled Anna with a pair of his fiancée's tights. And as if that isn't enough, he then tied her up, placed her lifeless body into a cardboard box, and loaded it onto his bike. Klaus pedaled to a nearby canal where he discarded the box as if it were nothing more than trash. The police, now fully aware of his heinous crime, arrested Klaus at the restaurant, bringing an end to his freedom, but beginning a new chapter of grief and justice for Anna's mother, Marianne, and the entire community. Klaus Gombrowski's arrest marked a pivotal moment in the search for Anna Bachmeier, but it also opened a Pandora's box of horrors that would haunt the community for years to come. As soon as Klaus was apprehended, details about his past began to surface, details that made the tragedy even more harrowing. Klaus Gombrowski wasn't just any man. He was a convicted sex offender with a deeply disturbing history. And we'll get into this here in a bit. But when interrogated by police, Grabowski spun a shocking tale in an attempt to justify his heinous crime. He claimed that young Anna had tried to extort money from him by threatening to tell her mother about the abuse. According to Klaus, he panicked, fearing that he would be sent back to prison, and in a twisted act of what he described as self-defense, he killed her. But the truth as we know it is far more sinister. Grabowski described how Anna, sitting innocently on a chair in his apartment, was strangled with his fiancée's pantyhose. He mentioned that she struggled, at one point even falling off the chair as she fought for her life. But Klaus showed no mercy. He continued to strangle her until the life drained from her body. It was a crime of unspeakable brutality. After Klaus's arrest, the investigation led authorities to a canal where, tragically, Anna's lifeless body was discovered. She had been zip-tied and cruelly stuffed into a cardboard box. When the authorities informed Marianne that they had found her daughter's body, she was asked to come to the coroner's office to identify Anna. But Marianne, in a move that puzzled many, refused to see her daughter in that state. She simply told the investigators that she believed them, and she accepted that the remains that they had found belonged to her daughter. So, a lot of people found this to be very odd, including investigators at the time, but I don't blame the woman. That's your daughter and you're the only one who would be able to identify her. You know that she most likely died in a very violent way. So, many people are quick to judge on how someone would react in a situation like that, but I think it's important to remember that everyone handles grief differently, and this just might be Marianne's way. But then again, on the side of the investigators and the police, someone has to identify her. And typically, family members, or at least someone in the family, is willing to do that, even in very violent crime situations. So I don't know, it's a little bit weird there. From an outside perspective, Marianne's behavior seemed unusual and even cold. She didn't break down in front of the cameras or the police. She didn't dwell on the tragedy publicly. Instead, she went back to work almost as if she was trying to return to some sort of normal life. This reaction sparked rumors and whispers among those who didn't understand the depths of her grief. Some people questioned her love for her daughter, not realizing that everyone processes trauma and loss differently. So, yeah, you don't know how someone's going to react in one of these situations. There are some people out there who do not cry, do not show emotion, and just don't show anything out in public. And then there's some people who are totally comfortable with it. They can't hold it in and they just let it all out. It really just depends on the person. I feel like we can't really judge anyone for how they act in these situations. For Marianne, this whole situation wasn't about outward displays of emotion. The pain was there, but it was buried deep within. A silent storm raging inside a mother who had just lost everything. The arrest of Klaus Grabowski was just the beginning of a complex and chilling investigation that would not only unveil the details of Anna's tragic death, but also expose deep flaws in the criminal justice system. The police collected substantial evidence linking Klaus to Anna's abduction and murder. And as they continued their investigation, they found themselves unraveling a disturbing pattern of behavior that dated back long before Anna's death. Klaus wasn't just a man with a dark secret. He was a repeated offender, a predator who had been allowed to walk free despite his horrifying past. Years before Anna's murder, Klaus had already been convicted of sexually assaulting young girls. In 1975, he was arrested for the sexual abuse of two other girls. The details of this case were equally disturbing. Klaus had used manipulation and deceit to lure his victims, much like he had done with Anna. The court sentenced him, but not to a typical prison term. Instead, Klaus requested to be sent to a mental hospital, claiming that he needed psychological help. The court granted his request, and Klaus was sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. But even this was not the end of his twisted story. In a bid to prevent further offenses, Klaus underwent chemical castration in 1976, a procedure that was supposed to reduce his sexual urges and prevent him from harming any more children. For many, this was seen as a solution, a way to manage the threat he posed without resorting to indefinite imprisonment. But Klaus had other plans. Despite the chemical castration, Klaus soon found a way to undermine the very treatment to keep him from reoffending. After being released from the rehab center just 30 days after his chemical castration, Klaus began undergoing hormone treatments in secret, attempting to reverse the effects of the procedure. This act of defiance revealed Klaus's true nature. He had no intention of changing. Instead, he was determined to regain the ability to carry out his darkest desires. And tragically, it was the very determination that led to the death of Anna Bachmeier. The case of Klaus Grabowski is one that raises profound questions about the justice system's ability to protect the vulnerable. How could a man with such horrific history be allowed to walk free after only 30 days in a rehab center? How could someone who had been chemically castrated manage to reverse the treatment and continue to pose a threat? For Anna's mother, Marianne, these questions were likely at the forefront of her mind as she struggled to come to terms with the loss of her daughter. The system that was supposed to protect Anna had failed, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. But as the investigation continued, one thing became clear. Justice for Anna would not be straightforward. The trial of Klaus Grabowski would soon become a battleground, not just for the legal system, but for a mother's grief and a community's outrage. On March 3rd, 1981, almost a year after the tragic death of Anna Bachmeier, the trial of Klaus Grabowski began. The courtroom was packed, with every seat filled by spectators, journalists, and those who came seeking justice for a little girl whose life had been brutally cut short. As the trial commenced, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension. All eyes were on Klaus, the man accused of a crime so heinous that it sent shockwaves through the community. The charges against him were grave: abduction, sexual assault, and the cold-blooded murder of a 7-year-old Anna Bachmeier. But for Marianne, the trial was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a battle between grief and anger, between loss and the need for justice. Every day of the trial, Marianne sat in the front row, her presence a stark reminder of the innocence that had been stolen. But Marianne was not content to sit quietly. As the proceedings unfolded, she would often find herself unable to contain her emotions. At times, she screamed out in anger, her voice piercing the otherwise somber courtroom, directing her fury at the man who shattered her world. She wanted Klaus to know that she was there, that she would not be silenced, and that she was there to ensure he faced the full weight of the law. I can't imagine being a mother in this situation and not doing the same. That fucking sicko is gonna know that he cannot get away with this. Klaus Gabrowski's defense team wasted no time in putting forth their argument, a claim that from the outset seemed both implausible and desperate, and frankly, fucking rude. They stuck to their narrative that Klaus had acted in self-defense, insisting that Anna had threatened to tell her mother about the abuse, which they argued had driven Klaus into a state of panic. According to the defense, Klaus's actions were not permitted, but rather a tragic outcome of the fear and desperation. But the defense did not stop there. They also tried to build a case around Klaus's hormone imbalance, which they attributed to the chemical castration he had undergone years earlier. This, they argued, had significantly affected his mental state and contributed to the events that unfolded. The defense wanted the court to see Klaus not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man who had been driven to madness. For the public and the jurors, this defense began to take on a strange appeal. Klaus was a man who had made a terrible mistake, they suggested. A man who had paid a price for his past crimes through chemical castration, only to find himself unable to cope with its psychological effects. As the defense made their case, Marianne could see that the courtroom sentiment was beginning to shift. Public sympathy began to tilt, ever so slightly, towards Klaus. It was as if people wanted to believe this horror was not entirely his fault, and that there was some external force to blame. And this growing sense of pity was infuriating Marianne. To the court, it was clear that Marianne was barely holding herself together. Her outbursts, her tears, her visible distress were all signs of a mother in unimaginable pain. Yet, despite this, Marianne remained steadfast. She would not allow Klaus to be portrayed as a victim. For her, there was no excuse for what he had done. No hormone imbalance or psychological turmoil could justify the deliberate and cruel murder of her daughter. But the prosecution wasn't about to let the defense's narrative go unchallenged. Their argument was straightforward. How could a grown man, 35 years of age, claim self-defense against a 7-year-old child? The physical evidence was damning. Klaus had no defensive wounds on his body, and nothing to suggest that Anna had attacked him in any way. The prosecution emphasized that this was not a case of survival or self-preservation. It was a premeditated act of violence against an innocent child. And I 100% agree. Again, this dude's 35 years old. He is clearly a predator. He has done it before and has been slightly reprimanded for it. Anna was an innocent girl walking around her neighborhood. She had been in his house before. She had talked to him before. I'm sure she had met his fiance. So it's just no excuse. Like, this guy has absolutely no excuse. The boys are taking over. Oh my gosh. What are y'all doing? Oh, you hungry? You already ate your food. Silly. Hey guys, it's me, here with a quick and exciting update. If you're enjoying the deep dives into the mysteries and stories I cover, you're going to love what I have in store for you in our monthly newsletter. Every month, I send out an exclusive true crime newsletter packed with behind-the-scenes content, upcoming episode previews, and additional insights into the cases we discuss. But that's not all. Newsletter subscribers also get access to my curated list of true crime current events. It's the best way to stay connected and engaged with the podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head over to the website and sign up for the monthly true crime newsletter today. Don't miss out on all the extra content and perks I've created just for you. Thanks for listening and supporting our show. Now let's get back to the story. In the eyes of the law, Klaus was already a dangerous man. He wasn't just any defendant. He was a convicted sex offender with a history of preying on young girls. This was not his first time in the courtroom, nor was it his first time facing such serious charges. But this time, he wasn't just accused of sexual assault. He was on trial for murder. The prosecution laid it out plainly. Klaus had targeted Anna because she was vulnerable, because she was young, and because he had a history of exploiting children like her. And when he realized the enormity of what he had done, his response was to show no mercy, but to silence her forever. This was the third time Klaus had been charged with sexual assault of a young girl. Given his history and the horrific nature of his crime, many believed that he would face a long prison sentence, perhaps even life. But despite the strong case presented by the prosecution, the outcome of the trial was far from certain. So as the trial continued, the tension in the courtroom only grew. Marianne Bachmeier's presence was the constant reminder of the tragedy that had brought them all there. And the defense's attempt to paint Klaus as anything other than a cold-blooded killer was met with fierce resistance from the prosecution. The question hanging over the courtroom was clear. Would the jurors see Klaus for what he was, or would they be swayed by the defense's arguments of a man driven to madness by forces beyond his control? Marianne, for her part, was determined to make sure that justice would be served, for Anna and for all the victims who had suffered at the hands of Klaus. March 6, 1981, the courtroom was thick with tension. For the past 2 days, the trial of Klaus had been an emotional roller coaster, especially for Marianne. She had been there every day, sitting in the front row, just feet away from the man who had taken everything from her. But today was different. As Marianne entered the courtroom that day, she was wrapped with a large green coat. She took her usual seat in the front row, but something about her demeanor had changed. Unlike the previous days, where she had been very vocal, shouting at Klaus, crying outwardly, today she was quieter, more reserved. Those who had been following the trial closely noticed this shift in her behavior. Perhaps they thought she was finally beginning to break under the weight of it all. But no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Throughout the morning, Marianne remained silent. As the court proceedings droned on, she suddenly stood up and left the courtroom. She was gone for only a few minutes, but when she returned, she seemed more composed, almost as if she had made a decision. She quietly sat back down in her seat, her green coat still draped around her. And then, without warning, Marianne rose from her seat, her movements steady and deliberate. She walked straight towards Klaus. In an instant, everything changed. From beneath her green coat, she pulled out a Beretta 70, a small pistol that she had hidden. Without hesitation, she aimed the gun at Klaus and pulled the trigger. The first shot echoed through the courtroom, followed by another, and then another. In total, Marianne fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus. The man who had caused so much pain and suffering was killed almost instantly. He slumped forward in his seat, his life extinguished by the very woman whose daughter he had taken. Marianne simply lowered the gun. She made no attempt to flee, no effort to resist. Marianne Bachmeier stood there, calm and composed, as the authorities moved in to apprehend her. The gun fell from her hand, clattering to the ground as she was taken into custody. The trial of Klaus had come to an abrupt and very unexpected end, but another story was just beginning. The story of a mother who had taken justice into her own hands and the legal and moral questions that would rise from her actions. In those few seconds, Marianne made a decision that would forever alter the course of her life, in the lives of everyone in that courtroom. What drove her to take such drastic action? Was it grief? Rage? A desperate need for justice? The answers to these questions would be debated for years to come. But on that fateful day, only one thing was certain. Klaus would never hurt another child again. Literally seeing this is a reenactment, but like even reading through this and also watching it, it literally gives me chills. You hear a lot of parents talk about this, like, if that happened to my daughter, I would kill the guy, or like, that guy's getting justice and he deserves what's coming for him. That stuff. This woman literally took it into her own hands to do just that. I feel like so many people would wish that they could do this, but obviously a lot of people would never do it. This lady had the freaking balls to just get up and kill this guy. It's just insane to me. And I cannot blame her, if I'm being honest. Following the shooting of Klaus, Marianne was charged with murder. Her case quickly became one of the most high-profile trials in West Germany. Given the circumstances of her actions and the intense public interest surrounding the case, the charges against her were severe, but the unique context of her act, a mother avenging her daughter's brutal murder, added a complexity to the legal proceedings. The public's reaction to Bachmeier's actions was deeply divided. Many sympathized with her as a grieving mother who, in their eyes, had delivered justice where the system had failed. While she was held in custody, support poured in from across the country. Letters, gifts, and flowers arrived regularly, signaling that a large part of the public understood her pain and even endorsed her actions. However, the sentiment wasn't universal. Some critics argued that a constitutional state cannot condone vigilante justice, regardless of the circumstances. The rule of law, they insisted, must prevail to prevent a descent into chaos where individuals take justice into their own hands. And I totally get this. Like, you can't just let everyone be their own vigilante and serving justice however they think is fit. It's just not going to work. Literally, she killed someone. She murdered this guy. Something's got to happen. They can't just let her get off scot-free, you know? As the case progressed, public opinion became more nuanced. When the magazine Stern published an in-depth story of her life, it revealed details that complicated her image as the innocent mother, as we stated earlier. The article exposed the fact that Marianne had given up her first two children for adoption, leading some to question her motivations and maternal instincts. This revelation caused a shift in how members of the public perceived her, though she still retained considerable support from those who viewed her actions as a justifiable response to unbearable grief. At the same time, the West German judiciary faced criticism for allowing Klaus, a man with a history of sexual offenses, to live freely. Many argued that the system had failed Anna, and by extension, failed Marianne. While awaiting trial, Marianne struggled immensely with her mental health. The trauma of losing her daughter, coupled with the stress of the legal battle, took a heavy toll. She was diagnosed with PTSD, and her condition worsened over time. Eventually, she was transferred from jail to a mental hospital, where she attempted suicide multiple times. Her mental state was fragile, and she refused to engage with psychologists or cooperate with law enforcement. She became increasingly isolated, withdrawing into herself as she grappled with her overwhelming grief and guilt. When her trial began, Marianne's defense centered around the idea that she had acted out of uncontrollable grief and anger. Her legal team argued that Marianne could not sit by and listen to Klaus lie about the events leading up to Anna's murder. Her defense portrayed her as a mother driven to the brink by the trauma of losing her daughter in such a horrific way. On the other hand, the prosecution maintained that regardless of her motives, Marianne had committed premeditated murder. They argued that her actions, though understandable to some, were still unlawful. The legal system, they insisted, could not excuse such a deliberate act of violence. And I totally get this. Obviously, they can't just let this happen. Everyone would be out and about, committing crimes, stealing shit. I don't know. The world would devolve into madness if they let this happen, pretty much, I feel like. On November 2nd, 1982, Marianne stood trial, initially charged with murder. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal professionals and jurors, but with cameras, news outlets, and an overwhelming number of supporters who saw Marianne's actions as justified retribution for Klaus's heinous crime. Many of these supporters were mothers themselves, standing outside the courtroom with signs expressing solidarity, while some sent her gifts and flowers during the proceedings. One note reading, "For you, from a grandfather who would have done the same, you are not alone, courage." Despite the support, her trial lasted 25 long days, a period marked by intense debate. Was this a premeditated act of vengeance or a spontaneous outburst of trauma-driven anger? On one hand, Marianne had killed a man who had caused immense suffering, but on the other, she had also traumatized an entire courtroom of 50 people with her sudden act of violence. Initially, Marianne seemed to bask in the attention and support. However, public opinion began to shift when details about her past and her relationship with Anna came to light. What was once viewed as the act of a grieving mother seeking justice for her daughter's death began to be seen as something different. A mother who perhaps had not cared as much as she claimed until it was too late. Psychologists at the trial provided intriguing testimony. They revealed that the night before she shot Klaus, Marianne had a vivid dream where Anna appeared in the courtroom, witnessing the trial. In the dream, Klaus made a statement accusing Anna of manipulating him into committing his crimes. The anger Marianne felt in that dream was so intense that she shot Klaus. Upon waking, she decided to make this dream a reality. A key point of contention in the trial was whether the crime was premeditated or not. Marianne insisted that it was not. She explained that she had carried the gun with her at all times, even during Anna's funeral, because of the intense media attention surrounding the case. When asked for a handwriting sample during the trial, she wrote, "I did it for you, Anna, with 7 hearts, one for each of Anna's 7 years," and maybe one for each of the 7 bullets that she shot towards Klaus. There were also questions about whether her partner, Christian, had any involvement in the shooting. It was reported that when Marianne fired at Klaus, Christian shouted, "She did it. She actually did it," suggesting he may have known about her intentions. However, Christian never testified during the trial. After 28 days, the judge concluded that Marianne was not a danger to society. The court ruled that the killing was not premeditated, but rather a spontaneous act born out of the trauma and grief she had been enduring throughout the trial and since her daughter's death. The prosecution dropped the murder charge. On March 2nd, 1983, the court reached a final verdict. Marianne was convicted of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. The court mostly accepted the defense's argument that the crime was not premeditated. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but was released after serving just 3. This is crazy to me. They drop the murder charge and give her manslaughter. 6 years sentenced, and she only serves half of that. Following Marianne Bachmeier's trial, the public reaction was intense and deeply divided. The case captivated the entire nation, leading to widespread debate about justice, morality, and the limits of personal retribution. A survey conducted by a newspaper shortly after the trial revealed the complexity of public sentiment. 28% of respondents believed that Marianne's sentence was appropriate. 27% thought it was too harsh, and 25% felt it was too lenient. The remaining 20% were undecided, reflecting the deep uncertainty many felt about the case. While a slim majority thought her sentence was fitting, a significant portion of the population remained divided on whether Marianne's actions were justified or if they had crossed a line. In a related turn of events, Anna's father, Christian, attempted to hold someone else accountable for the tragedy. He sought to sue the doctor who had administered the hormone therapy that partially reversed Klaus's chemical castration, believing that this treatment might have contributed to his reoffending. Christian's lawsuit argued that the doctor's actions indirectly enabled Klaus to commit the horrific crime against Anna. Although this lawsuit ultimately went nowhere, it highlighted a troubling issue. Once a convicted sex offender undergoes such treatment, there exists a way to reverse it, potentially putting others at risk. Marianne was released from prison in 1986, 3 years after her conviction. Upon her release, she was placed on probation for 2 years and 10 months. Her early release sparked another round of public debate, with many questioning whether justice had truly been served. The media played a significant role in shaping public opinion on Marianne. Initially, she was portrayed as a tragic figure, a grieving mother who, in a moment of unimaginable pain, took the law into her own hands to avenge her daughter's brutal death. This narrative garnered her widespread sympathy, and she became a symbol of a mother's love and the lengths one might go to protect their child. However, as more details about her past emerged, particularly her troubled relationship with Anna, and the fact that she had allowed her first 2 children to be adopted by other families, public perception began to shift. Marianne was no longer viewed solely as the heartbroken mother, but as a more complex and flawed individual. This more nuanced portrayal led to a broader societal debate on vigilante justice. Was it ever justified? And if so, under what circumstance? While many continued to support Marianne, seeing her as someone who had done what the justice system could not, others began to question whether her actions undermined the very foundations of a lawful society. The media's portrayal of her varied widely, from sympathetic to critical, reflecting the deep divisions in public opinion. Ultimately, Marianne's case became a touchstone in the ongoing debate about the role of personal justice in a civilized society. It raised difficult questions about whether the emotional impulse for revenge can or should be reconciled with the rule of law, and it left a lasting mark on the cultural landscape of West Germany. The story of Marianne Bachmeier didn't end with her release from prison. In fact, her life after the trial remained just as complex as the events that brought her into the public eye. The case of Marianne Bachmeier is one of the most well-known instances of vigilante justice in West German history. It captivated the nation and the world, leading to extensive media coverage. Journalists and television crews from across the country and even overseas flocked to Lubeck to cover the trial and the fallout from her dramatic act of retaliation. In the midst of this media frenzy, Marianne made a controversial decision. She sold her life story to the German news magazine Stern for around 100,000 Deutsche Marks. This fee wasn't just for personal gain. Marianne used the money to cover her mounting legal costs, which were substantial after her lengthy and highly publicized trial. But what happened to Marianne after the trial? What became of the woman whose story had gripped the world? Her release from prison marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one marked by attempts to find peace and rebuild her life far away from the shadow of the courtroom. In 1985, shortly before her release, Marianne married a teacher. Seeking a fresh start, the couple moved to Lagos, Nigeria, 3 years later. There, they lived in a German camp where her husband worked as a teacher at a German school. It was a world away from the intense scrutiny she had faced in Germany, offering a degree of anonymity and a chance to start anew. However, this new life was not without its challenges. Marianne and her husband divorced in 1990. Following the end of her marriage, Marianne relocated to Sicily, Italy. In Sicily, she found a new purpose, working as an aide in a hospice in Palermo. This work, caring for the terminally ill, seemed to reflect a quieter, more introspective phase of her life. But her time in Sicily was cut short. Marianne was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer while living there. Facing the seriousness of her illness, she made the decision to return to Germany, where she would spend her final years. Years after the courtroom shooting that made her infamous, Marianne continued to captivate public interest. Her actions and motivations were revisited time and time again as the world sought to understand the woman who had taken justice into her own hands. In 1994, 13 years after she shot and killed Klaus Grabowski, Marianne gave a rare and revealing interview to a radio station. This marked one of the few times she publicly reflected on the events of that fateful day. That same year, she released her autobiography, providing a more personal insight into her life, her struggles, and the reasons behind her drastic decision. Marianne's story was far from over, and she seemed determined to tell it on her own terms. On September 21st, 1995, Marianne made another public appearance, this time on a television talk show. In this candid interview, she admitted that her actions on March 6, 1981, were not entirely impulsive. Marianne confessed that she had carefully considered shooting Klaus in order to enforce her own form of justice. In her view, it was the only way to stop him from continuing to spread lies about her daughter Anna. It was a revelation that further complicated the public's perception of her, a mother driven by grief, but also by a calculated desire to silence the man who had taken everything from her. Adding another layer to this already complex narrative, a former friend of Marianne's appeared in a documentary in 2006, shedding light on the depth of her planning. According to the friend, Marianne had rehearsed the shooting in the basement of the Tipasa restaurant after Anna's murder. This revelation painted a picture of a woman who, despite her grief, was methodical in her pursuit of what she believed to be justice. During the documentary, Marianne herself spoke about her feelings regarding the shooting. She expressed deep sorrow that the events had unfolded as they did, acknowledging the gravity of what she had done. However, in the same breath, she admitted to feeling an overwhelming sense of relief when she learned that Klaus was dead. Despite the years that had passed, one thing remained clear. Marianne had no regrets for her act of vengeance, and she made it known that she would never forgive Klaus for murdering her daughter. Again, I can't blame her here. I cannot imagine losing a child in this manner and just going on with life completely normal especially when you think that this guy's not going to get justice and walk free after his trial. As the years passed, Marianne Bachmeier's life took on a quieter, more introspective tone. But even in her final years, she remained a figure of public intrigue, her every move scrutinized by those who remembered her dramatic act of vigilante justice. In the mid 1990s, as her health declined, a reporter took an interest in documenting Marianne's life, capturing her final years on film. The documentary, however, sparked mixed reactions from the public. Viewers expected an exploration of her daughter's memory, or perhaps a deeper reflection on the events that had defined Marianne's life. Instead, the film focused largely on Marianne herself, her love of gardening, her visits to her hair salon, and her battle with cancer, particularly her chemo treatments.
Ich bin zum Teil die Hauptdarstellerin, ich bin aber 12 Jahre später, Fluchtpunkt Sizilien, Schauplatz Palermo. Die neue, selbstgewählte... Wenn ich ganz große Schuldgefühle oder sowas habe oder ein schlechtes Gefühl habe, das ist zum Beispiel...
This shift in focus led to questions and criticism. People began to wonder, what was the true motive behind the documentary? Was it meant to be a tribute to a mother's love, or was it a portrait of a woman coming to terms with her own morality? The lack of emphasis on Anna's memory left some feeling that Marianne's narrative had become more about her own identity than about her daughter that she had lost. Despite the controversy surrounding the documentary, Marianne's life story remained compelling. Her journey from grief-stricken mother to avenger, and finally a woman facing her own morality, was a story that continued to resonate with many. Marianne Bachmeier passed away on September 17, 1996, after a battle with pancreatic cancer. In her final moments, the woman who had once taken the law into her own hands faced death with a quiet dignity. Following her death, Marianne was laid to rest in a double grave alongside her beloved daughter, Anna. I feel like she really did do it for the justice. Yeah, looking back, she didn't treat her daughter the best. She did not do what was best for her daughter. But I feel like when Anna was murdered, it hit her all at once. And she really did truly realize that she lost her forever. And maybe in those moments, she realized that she did care for her and that she should have been a better mother than that. And maybe all that guilt built up to the point where she felt like she had to do something to make it right for Anna. Marianne Bachmeier's case didn't just capture the attention of the public. It also ignited a fierce debate about the boundaries of justice, the role of the law, and the moral questions surrounding vigilante actions. Her choice to take the life of Klaus in a courtroom, a place where justice is meant to be served through due process, posed profound legal and ethical questions that reverberated through Germany and beyond. From a legal standpoint, the implications of Marianne's actions were significant. At the heart of the debate was the question, should a grieving mother who took the law into her own hands be held accountable for the full extent of the law, or should her actions be seen through a lens of her trauma and loss? I think it's a hard question to answer. The case forced the German judiciary to confront the tension between the letter of the law and the moral sympathies of the public. Marianne's 6-year sentence for manslaughter, which was reduced to the 3 that she served, reflected this struggle. The court recognized her emotional state, but ultimately held that her actions could not be fully excused. Beyond the courtroom, Marianne's case had a ripple effect on German public policy and the discourse around victim rights. The idea that the justice system had failed her and her daughter stirred widespread dissatisfaction. Many questioned whether the system was adequately protecting the most vulnerable members of society, particularly children, from repeat offenders like Klaus. This case underscored the need for stricter policies around the management of known sexual offenders and sparked conversations about reforms to prevent similar tragedies in the future. On an ethical level, Marianne's actions raised difficult questions about the nature of justice and revenge. Can an act of vigilante justice be morally justified if the legal system is perceived as inadequate? Or does such an act undermine the very foundations of the rule of law? In her later years, Marianne reflected on the events that had shaped her life and the lasting impact they had on her. While she never expressed regret for killing Klaus, her reflections were complex. She acknowledged the profound changes that the event brought to her life, how it isolated her, and how it had consumed her identity. Marianne often spoke about the conflict between her deep sense of satisfaction at having avenged her daughter and the heavy burden it came with being seen as a symbol of vigilante justice. While she felt relief after Grabowski's death, she was also keenly aware of the moral and the ethical questions that her actions had sparked in society. Ultimately, Marianne's case remains an example of the complex interplay between law, morality, and the human emotion. Her story serves as a reminder of the lengths to which grief and loss can drive an individual and the ongoing debates about the role of the justice system in addressing the needs and rights of victims. So, that is the case of Marianne Bachmeier, the mother who took justice into her own hands and killed her daughter's killer. Honestly, the moment I heard about this case, it captivated me. Like, I thought it was so intriguing and also freaking badass that this woman did this. You know, we talked about the whole time, there's the push and pull between her justice and the legal system. And of course, in the back of my mind, the legal system has to prevail. You know, that has to stand as the guiding light. But I think it's also fair in a way, if I'm allowed to say that, that she decided to kill him and the way she went about doing it. I mean, this guy was a fucked up dude and he deserved to die, in my opinion. But what do you guys think? I really want to know your opinion on this because I feel like so many people will have a lot of different ideas on this and different stances they may take from it. So let me know down in the comments. Do you think she was justified in doing this? Do you think that she should have let the law play out and see what happened in his trial? Yeah, I don't know. It's a very weird case and it's very interesting that this actually happened. And I feel like of all places for it to happen, it would happen in Germany. So yeah, let me know in the comments your thoughts on all this. Also, you know, do you think it was premeditated? Because yeah, she shot him. She should have to deal with the legal consequences of that. But a good question is if it was premeditated or not. Because, you know, sure, she carried around the gun wherever she went in that moment. Did she choose to do it in that moment in the courtroom? Or did she rehearse that in the basement of the bar? Did she plan on doing that specific day when she came in? Either way, she pretty much got away with it. 3 years in prison is not a lot, if you ask me, for what she did. She got to live a life after it. Sure, she died of cancer, but it's just very interesting to see how it all played out. Also, if you made it this far along, leave me this emoji in the comments below. And don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate it. It really means the world. And if you're listening on audio, leave a review on the platform of your choice. Thank you so much for your support. I'm Rachel, and until next time, stay weird and stay wicked. Bye.